with Mike Johnson's first full week as Speaker of the House. After the ascent so swift, many in Washington are still learning about him, let alone, of course, the rest of the nation that had never heard of him, which is just true. And it's a point, though, that in its truth became a funny kind of punchline this weekend on Saturday Night Live.
All right. And your name is what?
Mike Johnson. No one's going to forget that.
So how did you end up Speaker?
No one knows.
No one knows. There are clues, though, with reports diving into who Johnson is, how he might lead, and why a Republican Party that was so paralyzed by all that public infighting settled on this particular man. Now, part of the answer stems from weakness. The top elected Republicans and most visible figures were basically too divisive, even among House Republicans, to win over their caucus. Now, that itself is unusual, as a series of votes downed Speaker McCarthy and members of leadership like Scalise, and then MAGA firebrands like Jim Jordan. Now, part of the answer, I think, also turns on the Republican Party's Wolf of Wall Street problem. And that is the challenge of advertising a weak or unpopular product. I'll come back to that point tonight. Movie buffs may recall how that worked, but first, let's get into why Mike Johnson has suddenly become Leo's Stratton Oakmont. Because as the GOP has felt saddled with divisive baggage and firebrands, and people like Jim Jordan, who were really the Fox News face of a kind of endless grievance culture against Biden, that didn't work. They couldn't settle on that. They turned instead to a figure who is cast as calm, dry, even boring. That's how Johnson has often sounded since his 2016 election. It's how he sounded actually last time we had him here on The Beat. I can tell you, he was overwhelmingly calm. He was stylistically mellow, no matter what he was saying. Now, just hours before Republicans did elect Mike Johnson Speaker last week, top House Democrat Hakeem Jeffries began to preview the Democrats' opening salvo against Johnson. This is what he told me at a conference in Washington.
Mike Johnson has a very pleasant demeanor, but his voting record is as extreme as the most extreme members of their conference. Someone who, like Kevin McCarthy, like Steve Scalise, like Jim Jordan, voted to overturn the 2020 presidential election.
So that's the opening argument against him. Well, tonight, Democrats are saying that Johnson approach is now on display, that the mild demeanor is a mask for now seeking clashes with the Biden White House. Speaker Johnson taking what in other years would probably be a point of unity and trying to wedge his effort to undercut Biden's past domestic programs, including climate and tax fairness, into legislation on the Middle East. Biden White House officials see Johnson, who recently just met with the president since assuming the big job, as basically trying to give the Republicans a sort of arguably palatable face for the same old GOP attacks on everything from Biden's budget ideas to his approach to Ukraine. As for Johnson's actual record, it is clearly more conservative, or as Jeffries put it, more extreme than some members of the Republican caucus. And Johnson was promoted so fast that some of his background and his statements are now getting sort of vetted in reverse. They're coming out now after he got the job.
By the way, America, the United States of America is not a democracy. You know what democracy is? It's two wolves and a sheep deciding what's for dinner. You don't want to be in a democracy, okay? Majority rules, not always a good thing.
There's also reporting about how he likened environmentalists to being basically devil tacticians. And that's what you heard there about how he said democracy really works, which is striking considering that as Trump tried to overthrow his legal loss and stage a coup in 2020, Johnson was the important architect of the electoral college plank of that strategy, as the Times reports. Now, Johnson also backs national abortion bans. He wants to overturn marriage equality, though he did reportedly tell members recently that he sees this new rule as trying to represent the whole party, not just the past views he stated in his own career, that is his ideology, or what he said was representing his district. Now, many Republicans view Johnson as the better political face than the firebrands I mentioned, or the longtime D.C. figures who flailed and ultimately failed. And that is how Johnson became the answer to the Republican Party's Wolf of Wall Street problem. And let me explain this very clearly here. This is a party which, even before Trumpism, was losing over and over. If you just check the numbers, not opinion, not personalities, Republican Party lost the total vote in 7 of the last 8 presidential elections. And it has seen Trump and MAGA politics drag down its results in every midterm since Trump emerged. Now, when a product is weak or unpopular, and we can bring back the Wolf of Wall Street here, because you know what I'm talking about. These were the penny stocks that Leo's Jordan Belfort character was hawking. But you can't hawk penny stocks or something that's declined to the value of 0 transparently and honestly. You can't say what you're selling. So you have to spin or divert or just outright lie, as Leo did in selling those junk stocks and pretending that his junk shop warehouse was actually a top-tier financial firm, and they made up this respectable branding. They called it Stratton Oakmont. Now, this is what some Republicans appear to see Johnson as. With the record I just mentioned and the losses I just mentioned and the way Jim Jordan couldn't even get the party together, they now have their hopes for their Stratton Oakmont, even if, in the movie, remember, that was a bid to hide Leo's toxic agenda and the toxic assets he was selling.
Sell anything, sell that. Go ahead. Sell me that pen.
Can I finish eating first? I'm eating tonight.
Brad, show him how it's done. Boom. Sell me that pen. Watch. Go on.
Write your name down on that napkin for me.
I don't have a pen.
Exactly. Supply and demand, my friend.
Holy creating urge.
A firm whose roots are so deeply embedded into Wall Street that our very founders sailed over on the Mayflower and chiseled the name Stratton Oakmont right into Plymouth Rock.
From the dinner scene, which were the guys he collected to do this very shady work, to that brand presentation of the new so-called Stratton Oakmont and its false pledges, at least in the movie, of course. They all turned out to be false. It's based on a real-life story. That's the brand, or perhaps the mask for an agenda. Now, we are discussing this on Halloween night, as I mentioned with Nicole here. It is Halloween in America, and so maybe that mask sounds a little spooky. But Democrats say the consequences will be actually scarier than any ghost costumes you might see tonight. In fact, one Obama veteran linked Mike Johnson to this spooky season on the very night he became Speaker. This was just last week after that rebel assist from Congressman Matt Gaetz.
Do not be fooled by the Halloween costumes you've seen on display today. Matt Gaetz is bipartisan, centrist, reasonable anti-corruption guy. That's not who he is. That is not who Mike Johnson is. Mike Johnson is every bit the flamethrower that Jim Jordan is. He just wears a pair of glasses and dons a Clark Kent disguise.
Disguise, costume. That was Jay Komanduri. And he's striking a similar point that we heard there from leader Hakeem Jeffries. Although when House Democrats blast Mike Johnson as potentially the worst thing yet, it is worth noting the facts. It was Democrats in the House who used their votes, over 200 of them, to help a very few Republicans, about 8 of them, fire Republican Speaker McCarthy. That is just a mathematical fact that at times has gotten lost with all of the, political clashes. Now, did all those House antics lead to a speaker that is somehow worse than McCarthy? Well, that's part of the debate, and of course, time may tell. I do want to report that top Democrats stress this was, from start to finish, a Republican implosion. It's not their job, they say, to save Speaker McCarthy when he wouldn't even seek any compromise or public nod of wanting to get their votes. How do you build a bipartisan deal with someone who won't even make a deal with you to save their own job? They argue that Republicans also picked Johnson as the McCarthy replacement. Former Biden chief of staff Ron Klain was telling us about that last night. And so that's fair. The numbers go and the numbers come, and a different type of speaker who was, at least was willing to publicly engage might have pulled some of those 208 Democratic votes another way, and we might not be talking about Mike Johnson, who SNL says is so hard to remember. The branding here matters, whether you call it a brand or a costume or deceptive advertising. We actually are living through this very public inflection point and shift, at least in Republican branding, if not in substance, which tells you something about how aware they are that Speaker Jim Jordan, just like a Speaker Matt Gaetz or even Speaker Scalise, wasn't going to do the trick. Too unpopular, too divisive, even for them. So what do we have here? And is it the bridge to something better, as some Republicans have argued, or is it a Stratton-Oakmont moment for this party?